We're finally ready to start modeling short-run business cycle fluctuations. Now, some people get confused because there are three lines here and they all cross in kind of funny ways. So sometimes it's hard to figure out what's going on. I've tried to type out the steps for solving these problems so you can more easily know how to work through them. First, we're going to take the event given and we're going to decide whether that event shifts aggregate demand or short-run aggregate supply or long-run aggregate supply, although that would not be a business cycle fluctuation. And then we're going to think about which direction it shifts. Then we're going to use the diagram to show the impact in the short run. And the short run impact is going to be found where short run aggregate supply is equal to aggregate demand. And then we're going to figure out how the economy will return to a long run equilibrium. Remember, the long run equilibrium is where all three lines intersect. And it's primarily determined by the intersection of aggregate demand and long run aggregate supply. All right, so let's work through an example. In this video, we're going to be talking about aggregate demand shocks, and I've got two examples for you. So the first example is that we have a recession in Europe, and that is going to decrease demand for goods produced in the United States. So I've already told you the answer to the first step, right? I've already told you which line is going to be shifted by this event. But if you didn't know that, what you would want to think is, does this affect the inputs or technology that the US has to produce products? No. Does it affect demand or consumption of products produced in the US? Yes. So remember, aggregate demand is made up of consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports. And this is going to affect the net exports piece of aggregate demand. So what's happening here is that since Europe is in recession, there's a decrease in demand for goods produced in the US, which will lead to a decrease in exports, meaning a decrease in aggregate demand. So we figured out the first step here. We figured out which line has shifted and which direction it moves. So let's go ahead and draw that on the graph. All right. So we got our new aggregate demand curve. And the next step is to figure out what's happening in this economy in the short run. So in the short run, we're going to look at where our new aggregate demand curve intersects our short run aggregate supply curve. And that will tell me what's happening to output in the short run. You can see that output has decreased relative to the long run potential output. What's happening here? The US still has the same productive capacity. We have the same number of workers, the same natural resources, the same capital, the same technology. We can produce just as much as we could before. However, because of this inward shift in aggregate demand, we have a decrease in the overall price level. So we started out at A, that's our original equilibrium. And if the economy was functioning perfectly and everyone magically overnight adjusted to the new price level, we would simply see a decrease in prices with no change in output. We can produce the same amount of stuff. So we're going to keep doing that because demand for that has decreased. The price level of the US would decrease, but we would still have the same output. That's what would happen if the economy was functioning perfectly and we didn't have that upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve. But because we have these market imperfections, we have sticky wages, sticky prices, misperceptions, or some combination of those, it's difficult for us to adjust to a new price level in the short run. And so here in the short run, because of one of those market imperfections, people misinterpret prices, they can't adjust their wages or prices downwards. We're going to have a contraction or a shrinking of output, even though our overall productive capacity has remained the same. In the short run, the economy would move from A to B, right, due to one of those reasons why short run aggregate supply is upward sloping. Price level was lower than expected. Here have resulted in a recession or a contraction in the economy. How does the economy return to a new long-run equilibrium? Well, our long-run aggregate supply curve is not going to move. That's the same. Nothing has changed to change our real productive capacity. What's going to happen here is that our expectations about prices change, right? Over time, we can adjust wages or we can adjust prices downward, and we begin to expect or understand this new lower price level. And that means that our short run aggregate supply curve is going to shift out in order to bring us back to a long run equilibrium at the same level of output as before, simply with a lower price level. So in the long run, as we adjust to the new lower price level, short run aggregate supply will shift out, right? People will be willing to supply a larger quantity of goods at a lower price because they know that prices overall are lower. And we will return, we're moving in the short run from A to B, and in the long run from B to C.